Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology. I moved my mic back. I'm going to move it forward again. To help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And today we're going to talk about models of coping. I'm going to introduce you to that. Now, you know, we all know about coping and coping mechanisms and things of that. But there are different ways that you cope with things. Some people are better at coping than others. You know, some people are just such a mental and emotional mess, there is no coping. You know, it's just off the rails immediately. So, yeah, no. That is a problem, and if you find yourself being one of those folks that, you know, everything is a 5-alarm fire, you know, my husband, you know, he was, had some emotional, and problems and things that, you know, he had started taking meds for, and then, you know, he didn't like those meds, and he got off. But anyway, everything became a 5-alarm fire. You know, if there was a leaf out of place, you know, it was a 5-alarm fire. Ah! There are people that just, that's a deal. And if you find yourself in that group, it is my advice to go ahead and go talk to somebody. Because everything is not a 5-alarm fire. And you should be able to take things in stride, you know. It's like, one little thing shouldn't bother you. But then, of course, there's a cumulative effect. If it becomes a pattern, then that's going to bother you. So, we all have different models of coping and ways of coping with things. And as long as it's not harmful to you or others, which some people's coping is, then, you know, it works for you. Their health may not be what it was. They've lost old friends and family members, often spouses, and they probably don't earn the money that they once did. And of course, now we're talking about, you know, the older folks, because that's what we're working on here is late adulthood. And that can be a lifestyle change that messes older folks up. You know, their friends. I've been to 2 friends' funerals in the past 6 months. You know, these are people that I came up with. One I knew since elementary school, and the other I knew since middle school. And they passed away. So, you know, that's kind of jarring to realize that people your age are dying from, you know, diseases that you think of as people get older, you know, in their 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, and of course your family members, these people you grew up with, and they're a part of your life, then suddenly they're gone, you know, and you're left with that hole, and you don't really know how to fill it, because you might not have a support system where you can, you know, go to another person that would kind of take the place of the person that you lost. Excuse me. And of course, if you're retired, you don't earn the money that you earned while you were working. Some people earn more. I know a man who actually makes more in retirement than he did when he was working, because he worked at a couple places and has 401ks that he's drawing on, plus his Social Security. So, you know, he's doing better off than he was when he was working. So, you know, it's just one size doesn't fit all. It's different for all of us. But if you're not making the money you did in your late adulthood, excuse me, that can be stressful. Because whereas before you had money to throw around and had spending money or whatever, now suddenly you're on a much tighter budget. Hopefully your house is paid for, your cars are paid for, so you don't have that hanging over your head. You don't want debt in your late adulthood. So, you know, if you don't have the money for it, don't buy it. You know, save those bucks. Their lives keep changing in countless stressful ways. And that can be true. You might end up with parents that you have to take care of, you know, young adult children that you have to help out. One thing after another can come on you. And, you know, it can be stressful to be an older person. People don't think about that, but, you know, it's true. Yet in general, older adults have fewer mental disorders and are more satisfied with life than younger ones. And that's because of the security. One of my grandmothers told me you'll never have any money till you're in your 50s when you get your house paid for and your cars paid for. And that's been the case with me and my husband. We didn't have 2 dimes to rub together until we got our house paid for. And then we had that house payment money that gave us some wiggle room. And then we got the vehicles paid for, which gave us more wiggle room, so that we had some money in the bank. And then my husband could pull out his 401k, and we've kept half of it in there, but we pulled out some so he could buy him a truck. He's been wanting a truck since he was, I don't know, a truck of his own since he was probably 16 or whatever. But we pulled out some money so he could buy his truck. And then we found the truck on sale, end of the year clearance, red tag sale, for $20,000 less than he planned it on spending. So that worked out well. So we have wiggle room now to where we could do a few things. We're not rich by any means. We can't just plunk out things and buy more things, but we have wiggle room now. We're not stressed as we were when we were trying to, make house payment, 2 car payments, paying for everything else, utilities and stuff. So when you get older, hopefully you haven't put yourself in a debt situation, and you have money in the bank, because, like I said, as you start getting older, it becomes the time, once you're in late adulthood, I'd say, 50 or more, you don't want to get in debt. You don't want to buy things on credit. If you ain't got the cash for it, don't buy it, because most people have some sort of savings or 401k or whatever. And if you want to do like a lot of the British folks do and move to the country, escape to the country, because a lot of them live in big cities and work there, and the kids go to school there, whatever. And then when they retire, they get rid of the, usually it's townhouses, they're usually connected, and then they move out to the country in a country house and live out that way. And they have the cash, from their retirement to pay for that. And that's the way I recommend to do it, is if you don't have the money for it, don't buy it. Now, if it's within your budget and you can easily afford it, okay, go ahead. But a lot of folks make mistakes by putting themselves in debt in a situation where, it's not a good time. Because, let's face the facts, we're all going to die someday. If you're alive, you're going to die someday. And if you buy a new house with a loan when you're 50 years old, you're still going to be paying on that when you're 75. Just think about that. Are you going to live to be 75? One hopes, but do we know? Because then if not, you leave that burden on your spouse. Does your spouse make enough to afford the house? You got to think about these things, because reality is reality. Most people in the older years are happier because there's less stress in their life. There can be more stressors based on the situation. It all depends on what your life is like. But in general, older people are happier. They've got themselves figured out a little bit better. They're, in a better spiritual place, or in a better mental place and emotional. And their physical's starting to go. So that's the only problem there. So you're going to want to keep active when you get into late adulthood so you don't fall apart. Because, body at rest stays at rest, as they say, and a body in motion stays in motion. So, you don't want to tear yourself up and not be healthy when you're old. What accounts for this remarkable ability to cope? Well, like I say, it means different things to different people, coping. And different people have different ways of coping with things. So, there's no one, prescription for coping. But like I said, if you want to delve into it, go talk to a therapist, and you can find out what is the best way for you to cope, because everybody's different, and what works for this person might not work for you, and what works for them might not work for you. So, you need to figure out what is the best way for you to cope with things, because coping is a fact of life. If you fall apart with the slightest amount of pressure, and I know people who do, you put just one little bit of pressure, kapow, they just fall apart, and you're just like, holy, what is that about? But everyone would be in a better place, and we would have a better world, and a whole lot less, as my children call them, Kevins and Karens, if people learn to cope. You know? Just take a deep breath and cope, rather than just going off like a rocket. And I know that, unfortunately, here in the United States of America, bad behavior has become in vogue. We have leadership that's, showing terrible behavior at every turn. So, I ain't even going to get on that soapbox. Coping is adaptive thinking, meaning, you're adapting to the situation. You're adapting to whatever's happening. You're using your brain and not your emotions. Because, for other people, when you emote all over us, we're just like, oh my gosh, you are so out of control. Your emotions are so out of control. You're not even in control of your own self. But, if you want to cope with your life, think, think before you act. That used to be taught, I was taught that by my grandparents' generation. Think before you speak, think before you act. But people don't do that anymore now. Everybody's just impulsive. All emotion, impulsive, all the time. And that's why we're ugly Americans, according to the rest of the world. Or behavior aimed at reducing or relieving stress that arises from harmful, threatening, or challenging conditions. Now, that's just a part of life. We're all going to come into situations where we feel, stressed, harassed, in harm's way. And like I say, if you can think before, emoting, that can help you in the situation. Now, there was a situation recently, and I was not super happy about it because we thought some stuff was going on. So I thought about, well, what do I want to say? What is the best thing to say to this? And so I thought about it, and I came up with it. So it would have been all too easy for me to just explode and emote all over this person. But, I thought, well, here's what I want to convey. And that's what I did. Not everyone in the world is going to be happy with you. There's a saying, I heard it not too long ago, and I've read it in other places, where you're always the bad guy in somebody's story. Like not all of us are going to be the good guy. We're the good guy in our own story. And some people know they're bad. Some people know they're the bad guy. But they don't care. You have to be able to reduce your stress, relieve your stress in a positive manner. Otherwise, you're just blowing up on everybody, and everybody's just like, what the is wrong with you? So, because we don't want to deal with that. But if someone is causing you harm, you have the right to say something and say, yeah, I'm not okay with this. This is hurtful, and I'm just not okay with it. And again, if anybody's threatening you, you definitely have the right to say, excuse me, no, that's not okay. And again, if someone's challenging you, you just have the right to either answer them or not. Sometimes, when I was younger, that's something my husband said that, is a problem with my family, is they are labelers, and they make up stuff about you and decide it's true. And he said my way of coping with that was just not answering them. Just like, okay, whatever, and walking away. And he said to them, he felt like that meant I was acknowledging they were right. But I wasn't. I just didn't want to fight with them. I didn't want to engage. They loved to argue and fight, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to deal with that. So, he says that part of that deal, the way they feel about me, is because I didn't defend myself enough. I should have stood up to them more, rather than just say whatever and walk away. Because in their mind, I was saying, yeah, you're right, okay, whatever. But I was definitely not doing that. So I was just trying to not get embroiled in their, arguments. Because I remember it, gatherings, where it was just yelling and screaming arguments about different things. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't even want to be here. I don't want to be part of this craziness, is an important aspect of mental health. So, yeah, coping is an important aspect of mental health. It can keep you in a place where you don't feel out of control, and you don't feel any situation that comes your way is out of control, because you've learned to adapt and think about situations and deal with them. It's like I told one of my kids one time, because he said, life just keeps beating me up. I said, I know. I said, and then when you get knocked down, you just roll with the punches, you get back up, dust yourself off, and keep moving. Because you're ultimately in charge of your life, and yeah, you're going to get knocked down. That's a fact of life. But it's up to you to get back up. So, do older adults cope better or less well than younger ones? Now, in general, most older people cope better. Now, there are situations where there's mental deterioration and things where they stop coping well. Like woman I know, she's got dementia. She's just falling apart mentally and emotionally because the mind can't keep up with what's going on. And that causes her stress, and it causes her anxiety. And then she thinks that she has to be somehow involved or help in some way, which she doesn't need to be, and we definitely don't want her to be, because, it's too much. No. So, in general, older folks are better at coping than younger folks, because younger folks haven't learned coping, mechanisms yet. They may have brought some with them from, their childhood. But in general, older folks have a little better idea of how to cope. Do they use different coping strategies? Now, again, in general, you've learned all your life, so you should have, a spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical base to stand on so that you can cope into late adulthood. And like I say, if that's not been the case, go talk to somebody, get your stuff figured out, take out your garbage, and, learn better ways of coping with your life, because life is not gonna just be super sweet, all happy flowers and butterflies every day of your life. And if you think that's the case, you're fooling yourself, and you need to wake up. But, there are many ways to cope. And, over in England, I was told from my grandmother, people are taught how to behave. And no one over here teaches people how to behave anymore. There's no such thing as etiquette. Manners are actually something that isn't really taught here anymore. I see some super rude kids and their super rude parents, and I'm like, ugh. You disgust me. Go away. Findings vary, depending in part on methodology. So, again, it depends on how you go about it. So, like I said, not everything is for everyone. You have to do what's best for you, and that's why I recommend therapy if you're having problems coping, because you need to learn what works for you. And what work for this person might not work for you. So it's a very individual thing, your life and your mental health. Later on, I'm going to talk about some theoretical approaches to the study of coping. Yes, people have done a study on coping. So that's how important it is to your life to learn how to cope. That someone has actually made a study of this. Adaptive defenses. We all know people that have a very defensive personality, defense mechanisms. We all have those. But again, you can adapt. You can learn and grow and adapt so that you're not defensive all the time and not offensive all the time. Because I usually never go on the offense unless I feel like basically if you're messing with my kids, then I'm gonna go on the offense. But basically, I'll deflect, I'll defend myself, but mostly I don't go on the offensive, because in all honesty, I find that offensive. I don't like to go at people. because that's not right. That's not the right thing to do. But, you know, we all need to be able to defend ourselves, because we're all going to be put in situations where we need to. And if you don't, people are going to steamroll right over you. There are, let's see, how do you put this nicely? There are so many narcissistic, sociopathic people in the world today, especially here in the United States of America, where it's become in vogue to be that way. You got to be able to defend yourself. And, you know, you have to be able to adapt and think in order to do that, unless you're just, you know, putting dukes up with everybody. And cognitive appraisal model. Again, cognitive, you know, is your thinking, and appraisal. You have to appraise your thinking. Your thinking might not always be what it needs to be in a situation. And especially where you have weak spots. We all know we have weak spots and where they're at. So sometimes if you're in a situation, you can think about, well, am I too emotionally involved in this situation to be objective? And if that's the case, you might need to take a step back, you know, go talk to somebody else, and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. This is what's happening. What do you think? You know? Because I've done that a lot, you know, with my husband and sons, when I, you know, went to therapy and then went to group and found out, you know, that in the past I was very defensive. My dad used to say, you got a chip on your shoulder, Ma. I'm thinking, well, I wonder how I got that. But, you know, he's got one there too. But it's like, you got to be able to appraise your thinking. So when I realized there was a weak spot there, then I was like, okay, how do I stop that? How do I overcome that? How do I find a better way of thinking about, you know, what's going on here? And the best practice is to take a step back and say, okay, am I reacting because I'm emotionally upset or mentally distraught? What is the deal? And am I acting in an appropriate way? And like I said, so many people are just so impulsive, they never think about their actions. They just do them, you know, and then, you know, later on they're like, oh, well, yeah. It's like, well, what's done is done. You know, you can apologize to people, you know, but what's done is done. So that's why I always told my kids, you know, especially I've got one that's got ADD, and I said, you know, you need to think before you act. Think it through before you do. And that way you don't regret things, because they told him in kindergarten, they called him the I'm going to get you kid. So every time somebody said something he didn't like, I'm going to get you, you know, and it's like, oh, Lord. Okay, and then next time we'll talk about a support system. You know, a lot of us don't have a good support system. Some of us do have a support system. And, you know, I got into a group of ladies, and we kind of made our own support system. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You need to find people who are going to be there for you and be supportive, and not going to be negative and tear you down, who are going to be positive and try to help build you up. You know, because I try to help build everybody up, you know, even if that means I call you out on your poop, you know, because that's just something that, you know, I feel passionate about. You know, I feel passionate about teaching people how to be, you know, emotionally and mentally healthy, because it was such a journey, an odyssey, if you will, for me, because my family didn't believe in that sort of thing. One of my grandmothers suggested that they take me to therapy, and the parents were like, no, and I know why, because then stuff would have come out, and they didn't want to deal with that. But you know, so when I did go, I went through several that weren't quite right, weren't a good fit, until I found one that was a good fit, and it was a woman who was a survivor of some of the things I'd been through. And so she understood, you know, about some of my feelings and reactions and things. And then she had me go to a couple groups. And I found out I wasn't as alone as I thought I was, because I thought, like, nobody else has had to live through this. This is crazy. And, you know, but there were people with worse stories than me. So you find out that life sucks, but you can get through it. You can get through it. You have to learn to adapt. You have to learn to cope. You have to learn to think and not emote all the time. Because, you're going to be able to deal with your life better if you can think before you act. And like I said, that used to be taught. It's not taught anymore, but it used to be taught, is think before you act. And again, a lot of older adults turn to religion. That's where they find succor in their religious beliefs. And of course, we all kind of know as we're getting older, we might be getting ready to check out at any time. And so we want to be on the right side of things. That's a joke from a movie, and I've applied that to some people that I know. The joke in the movie was, they're old and they're trying to get into heaven. So, that's a joke, but a lot of older folks do that. They get closer to their spiritual belief system, and try to be the best person that they can be, in hopes that when they do check out, they're going to be on the right side of things. So, there are different models of coping, and everyone, subscribes to their own, but the best thing that you can do, is to find the way that works best for you so that you are mentally healthy and emotionally healthy, and not a danger to yourself and others. So, that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope this helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.